back to Justice, a new podcast where I'll be covering the stories of true crime cases that have received justice and cases that are still seeking justice. I'm your host, Lindsay. Today, I'll be covering the disappearance of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. Kris and Lisanne were both Dutch students who disappeared in 2014 when hiking a famous trail in Panama. The story of their disappearance has been the subject of discussion in many different corners of the internet, and as a result, there are lots of different theories surrounding this case. But let's start at the beginning. Kris Kremers was born on the 9th of August 1992 in the Netherlands. Kris was described by friends and family as being an open, outgoing person. She was very creative, and she was also known to be responsible and mature. Kris had just completed her studies in cultural social education, specialising in the arts. Lisanne Froon was born on the 24th of September 1991, also in the Netherlands, and was described by friends and family as being intelligent, optimistic, and with a small group of close-knit friends, as she was more introverted than Kris. Lisanne was also a passionate volleyball player and played on her university team, although she had an injury to her foot and leg that had prevented her from playing for a while. She had just graduated with a degree in applied psychology. The two girls met whilst they were working in a cafe, and it is believed that Kris's outgoing personality helped Lisanne come out of her shell, and it seems like they just bounced off each other well. Before their disappearance, they had actually moved in together and saved the money from the cafe shifts to fund the trip to Panama. Kris had been on holiday to South America with her family previously and thought this would be an excellent location for their trip to celebrate Lisanne's recent graduation. They were both very excited for this trip, and they were hoping to spend some time volunteering with local children, to learn a little bit of Spanish, and to help out some of the communities that were in the area. Kris and Lisanne arrived in Panama on the 17th of March 2014 and spent 2 weeks enjoying what the country had to offer. They met a group of Dutch boys who were roughly the same age, and there are photos showing them all together in a hostel, cooking, socialising, and generally having a good time together. The girls went on hikes, tours, attended Spanish lessons, and were doing all of the touristy things that you might expect. On the 29th of March, the girls arrived in Boquete, a small mountain town around 60 kilometres from the border of Costa Rica. Here, the two girls were staying with a host mum called Miriam and her family. Although there was a language barrier, Miriam was used to having different groups of visitors staying, and she was able to communicate with them as needed. Kris and Lisanne planned to spend the next month volunteering in the local school whilst learning at Spanish by the River, which offered language classes. Kris and Lisanne spoke to the manager of Spanish by the River, telling her that they wanted to explore the area and go on some of the more famous trips and hikes. The manager said that the school worked with a guide called Feliciano Gonzalez, and she would put them in touch. The girls left to go explore more of the local area and to eat in a bistro which was photographed by them. When they returned to the language school, they spoke to the manager once more and booked the guide to take them on a hike on the 5th of April. It was then time for Kris and Lisanne to begin work at the local school. However, when they got there, it appeared that there had been a mix-up with their arrival times, and the school was not actually expecting to see them for another week. Kris described in her diary that the person they spoke to was quite rude, and it had been a negative experience for them both. The girls then looked into being transferred to a different school to work, but in the meantime, they decided to make the most of their newly found free time. The two girls woke up the next day and headed to Spanish by the River to see if their new school needed any help that day. But after no success, they booked a tour of a coffee plantation for April 2nd, the next day, with the tour guide Feliciano Gonzalez. The girls then headed to a nearby restaurant, and it was here that at 10:16 a.m, Lisanne used the Wi-Fi to download a map. It has never been confirmed what this map was detailing, but we can assume it was the trail that they were about to hike. they decided to hike the El Pianista Trail, which gets its name from the large steps up the trail resembling piano keys. The trail itself is around a 4 to 5 hour hike there and back, and on many hiking and walking websites, it's described as a fairly easy route to traverse without a guide. After the meal, the girls took a taxi to the beginning of the trail and began their hike around 11 a.m. Both girls were wearing shorts, sunglasses and hiking boots, whilst Lisanne wore a turquoise tank top and Kris wore a red and white striped one. They had one backpack between them, which contained 2 water bottles, their phones, which only had around 50% battery, and Lisanne's digital camera. Both the phones and the digital camera were paramount in the case in cementing a timeline of what happened next to Kris and Lisanne. On the way up the trail, the girls snapped pictures on the camera. You can see them both posing for selfies and pictures throughout the initial portion of the hike. They reached the top of the trail, the Mirador, and took some more pictures together around 1:15 p.m. It was at this time that Lisanne closed Google Maps on her phone. Although this was the usual end point for the hike, the girls did not go back down the mountain the way they came up, instead carrying on further into the jungle and down the Serpent Trail. This trail was very different to the Pianista Trail, with winding, narrow, muddy paths that led further and further into dense jungle. These paths were usually only used by very experienced hikers with guides, or by local people who often used machetes to clear the dense undergrowth. It is not known why the girls decided to choose this route, but many people have speculated that they were simply curious, were possibly overconfident from the success of their earlier hike, or maybe they felt like there was more to see before they had to turn around. At 1:38 p.m, Kris's phone lost signal and connection to her network, and it would never re-establish any connection from here on. The girls carried on further into the jungle, again documenting this with photos on the camera. The last photo taken was at 1:54 p.m, and shows Kris standing near a stream, smiling towards the camera, presumably with Lisanne taking the picture of her. The next few hours are unaccounted for, as the girls did not take any pictures, but at 4:39 p.m, a call from Kris's phone was made to 112, which is the emergency number for many countries in Europe. Another call was made from Lisanne's phone moments later at 4:51 p.m. Both these calls did not connect through, as the girls were so deep into the jungle that they had no signal. At 5:52 p.m, the phones were turned off, presumably to preserve battery, as earlier I mentioned they only had around 50% when they left for the hike at 11 a.m. The sun set at 6:40 p.m. that evening, and the girls did not return to their room. Their host Mum Miriam was not too concerned at this point, as she knew the girls were responsible and assumed they might be out at a bar, having dinner, or they had maybe met some other people and were with them for the evening. On April 2nd, the next day, Lisanne's phone made another call to 112 at 6:58 a.m, but again did not connect through. At 8:14 a.m, Kris's phone called 112 again, and changes were also made to the phone security, now allowing access to the control panel without the passcode. Meanwhile, the tour guide, Feliciano Gonzalez, had turned up at Spanish by the River to meet with the 2 girls for their tour that they'd booked the day before. When they didn't show up, Feliciano and a woman who worked at Spanish by the River called Eileen went looking for the girls. When they went to the host family, Miriam let them into the house and saw the girls very clearly had not been home since the previous day, as the leftovers from breakfast were still out and the beds had not been slept in. Not enough time had passed yet to allow them to go to the police and report the girls missing, so instead Eileen and Feliciano decided to go to the coffee plantation that the tour was booked for, in hopes that the girls had maybe misunderstood the instructions and thought that they had to meet their guide there instead. On the way, they asked a local ranger if anyone had seen the girls, and she had said no. At 4:13 p.m, the local area experienced a level 6 earthquake. Due to this, and with no sightings of the girls at any locations that they checked, Eileen and Feliciano made their way to the police station at 7:30 p.m. to try and report the girls as missing. Unfortunately, in Panama, you have to wait 48 hours before you can report an adult as a missing person. The police told them to go and get the girls' identifications and any other important papers in order for them to be reported as missing. They then returned to the police station at 9:30 p.m, and it was at this time that an official report was made. Eileen tried to phone what she believed to be Lisanne's number, but had in fact called Lisanne's mother while she was sleeping in her home in the Netherlands. Eileen asked if the speaker was Lisanne, and confused due to the late hour and being woken up in the middle of the night, Lisanne's mother said her daughter was in Panama, and then she hung up the phone. Eileen knew that this call was important, and she wanted to tell the girls' families what had happened, so she phoned the number back again to explain that the girls hadn't been seen in nearly 2 days. The Froons phoned the Kremers to inform them, and together the families filed a missing persons report with their own authorities, who would then pass this on to Interpol. During the day whilst this was all happening, Lisanne's phone made 2 calls to both 112 and 911 again at 10:53 a.m. At 1:56 p.m, Lisanne's phone made a further 2 calls to both emergency numbers. Her phone was then left on overnight. On Thursday, the 3rd of April at 9:32 a.m, Kris's phone was used to phone 911 again. This would be the last attempted phone call from either of the girls' phones. Felicio Gonzalez, on advice from the police, contacted Cineproc, which is a national service in Panama set up to help people in disasters or emergencies. An aerial search was conducted by Cineproc using a helicopter, and local volunteers performed a ground search of the village and wooded areas surrounding it. However, there was absolutely no trace of either Kris or Lisanne to be found. The girls hadn't told anyone their plans, so nobody really knew where to start looking for them during these initial searches. At 3:59 p.m, Kris's phone was turned on and took a screenshot of their host mum Miriam's contact details on WhatsApp. The phone was then powered off. On Friday, April 4th, Lisanne's phone was powered on around 5 a.m, but very quickly died, having drained all of its battery. This was obviously the last time that this phone was used at all. Kris's phone was turned on and off again at 10:16 a.m. and at 1:42 p.m, but no calls were made during this time. During the day, Cineproc began ground searches of the area around Boquete, using their team and local volunteers, but there still was no trace of either Kris or Lisanne. On Saturday, the 5th of April, Kris's phone was turned on again at 10:50 a.m. But what is important about this particular event is that this was the last time that the correct passcode was used to fully open the phone. Many people speculate that this was because this was the last time that Kris used her own phone. We don't have any conclusive proof, but it is assumed by many that Kris may have been unconscious or she might have passed away by this time. By Sunday, the 6th of April, both girls' families had arrived in Panama, along with detectives from the Netherlands to assist the local authorities. It was from here that a 10-day full-scale search of the forest hiking trail and surrounding area by local authorities and police dogs commenced. Cineproc were joined during this time by Senafront, which is a border protection force. They began using light and call signals in their search in the hope that the girls might hear or see them and be able to either respond or make their way toward the rescuers. In the early hours of the morning, on Tuesday the 8th of April, around 1 a.m, Lisanne's digital camera was used to take 90 photographs. These photographs are available to look at on the internet and are some of the main causes of speculation around this case. The photographs themselves are mostly all the same. Pictures of the night sky, some rocks, and some trees, taken with the flash on due to it obviously being nighttime. These photos also show either rain or dust particles in large amounts that had been lit up by the flash. Most of these photos were taken in quick succession of each other. There are, however, a few pictures that stand out from the rest. The first is a picture of a mess of red hair, assumed to be Kris's. This photo has been the subject of debate amongst internet sleuths, some of which believe you can make out Kris's nose and mouth, and possibly some blood, along with some darker hair believed to be Lisanne's. However, I have looked at these pictures over and over again, and I've really struggled to see anything beyond the hair. I can't even make out which way the person in the photo is facing, as there's no indication of any human features to my eyes. But you might want to look for yourself, and you might see something different. The next photo I wanted to speak about is a picture of a thin stick with two pieces of what looks like red plastic wrapped around it, sitting on top of a rock. Many people believe that this could be something the girls were using to signal for help, either by leaving it on a rock to attract attention or by waving it in the air. In another photo, the main body is mostly black with glare from the flash, but in the right-hand corner you can see what looks to be a corded strap, possibly from the backpack the girls had with them or the camera case. There are also white things ripped up into smaller pieces and placed on the rock. Many people believe that this is either a map or a brochure torn up to spell out SOS in the hopes that the helicopter might have seen it from the sky. There is also a small round reflective object, believed to be either a small compact mirror, part of a can, or the bottom of a Pringles can. Again, people believe that this might have been used to signal for help. None of the photos explicitly show either of the girls or any other person that can be identified. As I said, these photos have caused huge speculation amongst internet sleuths due to the fact that they are quite haunting and do paint a terrifying picture of what the girls experienced during the nights they spent in the forest. People have also questioned why it took the girls over a week to take any pictures if they had the camera with them the entire time. What exactly had prompted them to begin doing this at 1 o'clock in the morning? We don't know for certain, but again, people have guessed that they might have heard noises from the rescuers and be trying to signal them. They may have been trying to scare off a predator, or simply be trying to use the flash to see in the dark for some unknown reason. On Friday the 11th of April, Kris's phone was turned on at 10:51. It was left on and turned off again at 11:56 a.m. This would be the last time that any activity from either of the girls was recorded. Neither phones nor the camera were used ever again. Even though searches carried on throughout the month of April, not a single piece of evidence or any leads were found. Unfortunately, searches began to be scaled down as hope of finding the girls was running out. On April the 30th, the parents of both girls offered a $30,000 reward to anyone with information that could help solve the disappearance of their children. On the 12th of June, a local woman contacted the police and handed in Lisanne's blue backpack, which she claimed to have found by a riverbank near her village, nearly a 14-hour walk from the Mirador. She said it had been in the river, caught under a rock and a piece of wood. The backpack contained 2 pairs of sunglasses, $83 in cash, Lisanne's passport, a water bottle with some water still inside of it, Lisanne's camera and its carry case, 2 bras, and the women's phones, in good condition. The backpack and its contents were wet, and there were some leaves inside. The bras have been a point of discussion in the case, with people being suspicious as to why they were both in the backpack and not being worn by the girls despite them wearing them in the pictures from the camera. Lots of women have chipped in on this part of the case, and the general consensus is that in the heat and humidity of the rainforest, wearing an underwired bra would most likely be quite uncomfortable after a prolonged period. It may be that Kris and Lisanne decided to take them off to stop rubbing, rashes, or to help cool themselves down. The phones needed to be dried out before the police could properly look at the contents of them. Lisanne's phone was working, but the camera and Kris's phone weren't, meaning they could only use the memory cards to see what was on them. The police immediately investigated the content of the two girls' phones and Lisanne's camera to see if they could provide any clues about what had happened to them on the hike. What they found on the two phones and the camera would be the photo and call log evidence that was not only vital to the investigation, but evidence that spurred internet sleuths to become interested in this case for years to come. The camera SD card showed that there had been some photos and video taken before the hike that were deleted. They were able to recover all of these pictures and videos and determined that there was nothing suspicious about these deletions, and it was most likely just Lisanne cleaning up the memory card to make some room. However, there was one particular file that couldn't be recovered, and it is known famously as Picture 509. This picture is so important because it was taken between the last picture of Kris standing in the jungle posing happily for a photo on April 1st, and between the night pictures taken using the flash on April 8th. Many people find it suspicious that every other file was able to be recovered except for this one in particular, which has led many to speculate that it might have held some evidence or indication of foul play, meaning that it was intentionally wiped from the camera. After the backpack was found, Feliciano and a group of volunteers took it upon themselves to search that area again, in the hopes that they might find some more evidence, or even the girls themselves. On June 19th, the searchers found a hip bone, which sadly was confirmed to belong to Kris. Lisanne's hiking boot, with her foot still inside, was also found. The foot was examined, and they found that there had been 3 fractures, whilst the hip bone also had a fracture. Lisanne's hiking boot was found a few days later in the undergrowth, and her shorts were then later found floating in the Serpent River in poor condition. Throughout July, some more bone fragments were found belonging to both girls around this area. It is widely reported that the bones of the girls were bleached, and whilst this is the language used in the forensic investigator's report, this does not necessarily mean that they were bleached by someone as an indicator of foul play. Bones can be bleached by exposure to sunlight and naturally occurring chemicals in water and soil. In March of 2015, the case was officially closed, with the explanation that the girls either became lost or injured on their hike and died due to this with no foul play. Both families accepted this explanation, although they did feel that throughout the investigation the authorities could have done more in the initial days to find the girls alive. At the top of the Pianista Trail on the Mirador, there now stands a red wire cross with plaques, a memorial to both Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. There is also now a warning sign to tell tourists that the Mirador is the end of the trail and not to walk any further into the rainforest. As we come to the end of the podcast, I wanted to remember both Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon for their selfless actions in wanting to help and inspire others, in particular their desire to work with children and their fields of study which show they had so much to offer the world. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If the platform you are listening on allows reviews, I'd be grateful to hear what you think, and I hope to see you in the next episode.